Hoya Carnosa Krinkle giant form. It has this lovely rounded leaves. They're a little bit crinkly. It has a little bit of silver and pink speckles all over the leaves. And this plant is lovely to touch because the leaves are a little bit thick, a little bit more succulent, a little bit more velvety to the feel. The difference between this Hoya compared to the normal crinkle form is that the giant form, the leaves are about 50 to 75% larger. Watch the video until the end where I will share with you a tip on how to encourage this Hoya to bloom indoors. Let's talk about soil. The soil mixture I use is 50% premium potting mix and 50% orchid mix. I also add in a little bit of perlite in it as well. The main part of the soil mixture, it needs to be well draining and slightly be able to keep some moisture in the soil. Hoyas don't like their feet to be wet for a long time, so it is important to use a pot that has drainage holes in it and the soil to be well draining. Let's talk about watering. It's important not to overwater your Hoya because it is susceptible to root rot, and you'll notice root rot if the leaves suddenly go yellow and suddenly drops. So it's important to make sure the soil is completely dry before watering it again, and making sure the water is coming out of the drainage holes and get rid of all that excess water. The water I use is normal Melbourne tap water. Hoya, it doesn't really need anything fancy, especially this type of Hoya, the Hoya Carnosa Krinkle. Nothing fancy, just normal tap water. When it comes to fertilizing, I will fertilize my Hoya if I see it growing. Not just in the growing season. If I see it growing in winter, I will still fertilize it. I tend to use a product called We the Wild, and I'm not sponsored by them. I just happen to like that product, and I dilute it to about 50% of the recommended concentration because I don't want to over fertilize my Hoya, and I will tend to fertilize my Hoya once every 2 weeks. When it comes to temperature, this Hoya, the great thing about this Hoya, it can tolerate a whole range of ranges of temperature, from cool temperature to hot temperature. So my household, it ranges in winter from about 10 degrees, which is 50 Fahrenheit, all the way up to 30 degrees, which is roughly about 85 Fahrenheit. So the great thing about this Hoya, it can tolerate a whole range of conditions. That's why it's so easy to grow. When it comes to things like humidity, honestly, wouldn't worry about humidity. Forget the humidifier. Don't bother about misting it. Misting doesn't work anyway. This Hoya doesn't require high humidity. Normal household humidity is fine. No special requirements at all. When it comes to lighting, it is important for this Hoya to receive a lot of sunlight. It can handle direct sunlight, it can handle indirect sunlight, it just cannot handle low light situations. And it doesn't matter which direction you pop the Hoya in, whether it's an east or west or south or north facing window, it doesn't matter. The main part is receiving enough sunlight. And I give my Hoyas at least 2 or 3 hours of direct sunlight each day, and it's loving it. When it comes to pests, well, there are pests that can affect Hoyas, like mealybugs, aphids, thrips, also things like fungus gnats as well. And honestly, with this Hoya Carnosa Krinkle, it is pretty tough. I've never actually had a pest issue with this plant, but if I did have a pest issue with this plant, the main part is that I'd recommend that when you're watering your Hoya, maybe check underneath the leaves and the stems and on top of the leaves, just to make sure there's no pests, and if there is pests, just treat it accordingly. And thank you so much for watching. And for your bonus tip, how I encourage this Hoya to bloom is that got to be like a mean plant parent. Can't be nice to a Hoya, got to be a little bit mean. So what I mean by that, got to stress out the plant and make it think like it's dying. So how I do that is that I underwater my Hoya before spring comes in. So what I do is that I make sure the soil is completely dry, and instead of just watering it straight away, I will leave it for about 3 or 4 days, so make the soil extra dry, then I thoroughly water it again. And I will do this 3 or 4 times, and this will encourage the Hoya to bloom because it's thinking as it's dying. And you notice that with this Hoya Krinkle Giant form, it actually came with a label that said that it doesn't bloom indoors, but no, this type of plant can bloom indoors. It just needs the right growing conditions, and just be a mean plant parent and just stress it out. If you like this kind of content, you want to know more on how to encourage a Hoya to bloom, watch this video here where I go more in depth on how to encourage a Hoya to bloom. I'll see you there.